Good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me here today to speak to you. You know, when I was a teenager, there were really only two things that I wanted to be. These were my dreams. I wanted to be pretty, and I wanted to be skinny. Unfortunately, I was neither, and my dad took me aside one day and he said, "My darling, you will never be a model. Look at that nose. Look at those thighs. Why would you want to be?" He said, "Stop dieting. Stop looking in the mirror." He says, "Don't worry, you won't be a model, but you know what? You'll be other things." Now, really, when your face is full of pimples and you don't have a date for the formal, what other things could possibly be important, right? Anyway, around about that same time, I was 14. My dad gave me this copy. As you can see, it's very stuck together with sticky tape. This copy of Dylan Thomas's book, Under Milkwood, A Play for Voices. And let me tell you, this book changed my world. It changed everything. I remember reading the opening paragraph for the first time. "To begin at the beginning, it is spring, moonless night in the small town, starless and Bible black, the cobble streets silent, and the hunched quarters and Rabbit's Wood limping invisibly down to the slow black, crow black fishing boat bobbing sea." Those words were like chocolates in my mouth. I could taste those phrases on my tongue. Now, you know how some people go to the circus and they see trapeze artists swinging up above and they think, "Wow, I wish I could do that." Not me. I have never looked at trapeze artists and thought, "I wish I could do that." You know, first of all, I'm terrified of heights, and what if the other person doesn't catch you at the right moment, right? But when I read Dylan Thomas, I thought to myself, "I wish I could do that." So as it turns out, my father was right. I never did become a model, but I did become other things. I studied law. I got a Fulbright scholarship. I went to Yale University and I became a women's rights advocate. I set up an advocacy centre to end violence against women in South Africa, and I was very fortunate to be part of a fascinating time in South Africa's history when a new constitution was being written and a Bill of Rights was being put into place. I sat on a committee to draft new domestic violence legislation, and it was at that time that I think I really understood how powerful words can be and how powerful language is. You know, when you're trying to fix the broken world, what you actually need to start with are the right words to fit people's suffering. Economic abuse, sexual harassment, dowry deaths. You actually have to find language that can name people's pain first, and language that can shield people from harm. Language also helps us to imagine a better reality. So when we use the phrase, which is one of the phrases that found its way into the South African Constitution, "Everyone has the right to freedom from violence," what we are doing is we are imagining a better reality than the one we have. And we also start to manifest that reality. One of my earlier novels is called Things Without a Name. And it is about the power of language to name things. So the beginning of the book starts, Faith is my main character. She's a little girl and she's talking to her nonna, who's this old Italian woman, about words. And she asks her nonna, "Why must things have names?" "Otherwise, how must we know what it is?" her nonna says. "Things need names for understanding. So if you ask me for a flower, I don't bring you a spider." And she wriggled her 9 fingers like spider's legs. "But I like spiders," I told Nonna. "Yes, but a spider is not a flower." "What about things that don't have names?" I asked. "Like the colour of yesterday and the things we forget." Nonna lifted her 4-fingered hand to her mouth like she was holding a truth from slipping out. She smiled briefly before she answered me. "They don't exist, and if they do, they are lost." Words are powerful. And back then, I believed that if I found the right words, I could fix anything. So some years later, I transitioned from being an activist into a storyteller. And if we look at the world right now, what we really, really need is imagination to fix the problems that we've got, because the way the world is right now, it is not going to fix itself. I'm sorry to tell this to the younger generation, but we have really stuffed things up. And the world needs more great writers, more great thinkers. And tag, you're it. To solve the problems that we are faced with, we need a generation of creative, empathic, imaginative people. And these are the qualities that we learn by writing. I'm going to quote Jeanette Winterson, who's one of my favourite writers. This is what she says about language. She says, "For me, language is freedom. As soon as you have found the words with which to express something, you are no longer incoherent. You are no longer trapped by your own emotions, by your own experiences. You can describe them, you can tell them, you can bring them out of yourself and give them to somebody else. That is an enormously liberating experience, and it worries me that more and more people are learning not to use language. They're giving in to the banalities of the television media and shrinking their vocabulary, shrinking their own way of using this fabulous tool that human beings have refined over so many centuries into this extremely sensitive instrument. I don't want to make it crude. I don't want to make it into a shopping list language. I don't want to make it into simply an exchange of information. I want to make it into the subtle, emotional, intellectual, freeing thing that it is and that it can be. So we have choices. You know, we can use words to say, get lost, whatever, all right, that's nice, but we can also dip into language and we can use words to adorn, embellish, beautify, uplift, inspire, and light up our world. Beautiful writing ignites our senses and it stokes our imagination. And Terry Pratchett, the English author, instead of describing a dog as revolting and smelly, describes it as halitosis with a wet nose. One sentence, like the opening line of Kafka's Metamorphosis, can open up an entire world. I mean, just think what happens inside your brain when you hear this. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Or the first line of George Orwell's 1984. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. What is so exciting about all of you who are here today is that you are at the most incredible threshold of your own creativity. As you heard, I've just finished writing a book about parenting teenagers, and so I have really spent some time researching what goes on inside the adolescent brain in an attempt to actually understand how the hell to do this job. And you know what? Apart from the fact that your prefrontal cortex, which is your rational brain, the part that stops you from doing stupid things, which, by the way, only kicks in when you're around 24, so you guys still have a way to go. The rest is really good news. Teenagers are actually astonishing creatures, I discovered, neurologically. The reason for this is because your brains as teenagers are undergoing the most incredible transformations since when you had that big spurt of brain cells when you were inside your mother's tummies. It is the greatest brain change that happens in life. What happens at this time is that all the synapses are starting to get pruned and all the connections in the brain are starting to become strengthened. So it's like a sloughing off of some of the brain cells and a strengthening of other ones. Now, what actually establishes those connections are the brain cells that are being used the most. The things that you are spending most of your time doing as teenagers are the things that you will become. This is why parents are and should be anxious about how much time teenagers spend doing mindless stuff like watching, crappy movies and spending time on endless video games. There is a selection process happening in your brains, and it's happening now. So whatever you spend most of your time doing as a teenager, you will only become stronger and better at doing. I guess given this knowledge, it's kind of a wonder that some of us don't actually grow up into professional pimple squeezers or dieters. But I guess that's really what, why some people do become beauty therapists and models. So there you have it. The majority, though, of your brain wiring right now is happening now, these days. If you're playing guitar, writing songs, falling in love, writing poems and stories, these are the synapses that are really being fortified, which is a great predictor of what you will become in the future. So my advice to you is to do lots and lots of the things that you love now and create those powerful brain connections while you have the opportunity, while your brain is still on your side and your brain cells aren't all dying out like mine are doing at the moment. You are at the place now where you can actually change and shape your brains. Do it. The more you write now, the more likely it is that you will continue to write and that you will become published authors, thought leaders, academics, great orators, and people who can use language to make this world better. And I think this is something of what Rainer Maria Rilke meant when he wrote that the future enters us long before it happens. So I thought I would just leave you all with 7 pieces of writing advice that I have gleaned over the last 10 or 12 years of being a full-time writer, which, use, don't use, stuff that resonates for you, go for it. The first is write until your fingers bleed. Metaphorically, of course. Write a lot, as much as you can, okay? If you want to become addicted to anything, become addicted to writing. If you want to gorge on something, gorge on words and on language. Second piece of advice, read until your eyeballs dry out. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Read unlikely things, and the truth about reading is that unlike most things, you can actually never do too much reading. I mean, I don't know any parent who would really say, now young lady, put those books down. You've had enough of that for tonight. Unless you're like my daughter, who basically spends all her time as a real book geek and doesn't get any vitamin D. Then, of course, go outside and do some exercise as well. So read a lot. Also, read the book first before you see the movie. That's a really, really good idea. Seeing the movie doesn't mean you've read the book. The book is a different experience. And the thing about reading is that it slows things down. And we live in such a fast world. But though we live in such a world of such speed, we can actually only write and read at a certain pace. And it's not a digital pace. It's an emotional pace. It's the pace of breathing. You can only take one breath at a time. You can't compress reading. Reading takes place on the page, one word at a time. Fourth piece of advice, get feedback on your writing. It's always good to have somebody who can give you feedback and help you to improve your writing. Find someone you trust and respect, and somebody who doesn't necessarily care about your feelings. Somebody who will help you to improve your writing. And that goes together with a piece of advice, which is don't take anything personally. It's always about improving the writing. If they say your writing needs to be improved, it doesn't mean that you suck as a person or that you're not lovable. It just means that your writing can improve. That's a hard one, I know, for a lot of us. The fifth thing I want to say to you is write something important. Write something that needs to be said and something that really, really matters to you. Marcus Zusak, the author of the internationally successful The Book Thief, wrote and said, I set out to write a book that meant something to me, but I ended up writing a book that means everything to me. That is probably the first reason that it has had any success at all, let alone international success. As a reader, there is something about encountering a book when you have a sense that it means a great deal to the author, which I think is amazing advice. The sixth piece of advice is have downtime, have dream time. Now, this is so important for creativity, and basically this is probably the kind of space where all you're feeling is like bored, there's nothing on TV, all your friends are offline. That is a good thing. Spend time in that space where your brain is just not engaging with other stuff, where it feels like there's nothing happening. There's stuff happening in that nothingness. And it's really, really good for your creativity. You know how sometimes they say you have to run the battery right down on your phone before you recharge it? I've never really understood it, but it does. It's true with creativity. You really want to let that battery run down and let it flatline for a bit, because what happens is like this water table rises up again in its place. Creativity works like that. It's amazing. And lastly, I would tell you to go for your passion. As the quotation anthologist Terry Guillemets says, chase down your passion like it's the last bus of the night. And that's what you need to do. Make sure that you get on that bus. Nothing that you imagine or dream of is impossible. Truthfully, nothing is. Passion becomes your purpose, and the universe cannot resist a passionate purpose. As Goethe said, whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it, because boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So go for the magic. And thank you very, very much.